Why should I be studying for a future that soon may be no more, when no one is doing anything to save that future? And what is the point of learning facts when the most important facts clearly mean nothing to our society? This quote is from youth activist Greta Thunberg, who since August of 2018 has been striking from school to gain awareness around climate change.
She's gained massive attention across the globe and inspired thousands of youth internationally. Today we are to discuss our education system's failings around climate change and how we can fix it.
My name is Amelia Glickman. I am a student.
My name is Maya McNeil. I am a student.
We are students at Brattleboro Union High School with our own story of climate change in this very town.
For March 15th, 2019, Amelia and I plan to join the masses of youth to protest the lack of climate change prevention after Greta called for international student strikes.
For weeks, we planned with a small group of community members.
To publicize this event, I sent an email to the student body telling them how they could protest and how they could get involved. This email instead went to the administration for approval. It was denied and deleted without my knowledge.
We requested to announce this event over the loudspeaker. Again, we were opposed. On the morning of the 15th, I arrived at school at 7:45. I went to a BUHS staff member. May I enter early? I would like to print something. No, I had to wait till 8. School rules.
My printer ran out of ink, and so I only had my copy of her speech. Amelia had to print hers at the school, and everyone was already there when I arrived, holding up their signs.
And so I waited. At 8 a.m., I requested if I could enter and print something yet again.
What do you need to print so early?
Another staff member asked. It is a speech for our climate change rally. I do not have a printer at home.
You can't print that.
Why? Because
it's not a school-sponsored event,
they said. But eventually, 8:35 rolled around. When many of the students had gathered, Maya and I stepped onto the brick wall in front of the school.
We passed our paper back and forth as the rain made it limp.
Today we gather, students, young people across the nation and around the world to demand change. The motivations for our requests are not complex, they are not controversial, they are not to be argued. For we stand here...
came up behind Amelia and interrupted her. He asked her to get off the wall and move off of school property. We got off the wall and moved forward about a foot.
I continued to deliver my speech as I walked away from school property. We were not a school-sponsored event.
After the event, we were reeling with excitement and frustration. Earlier, we had been texting about whether or not we wanted to strike for the day. Amelia told me,
it's just weird because I like school, I want to go, but I actually want to make an impact. Why should this be a choice? After this event, my sentiments had not changed. I sat on the steps for a long time. I had to make a choice.
I had a test today in a class I genuinely want to go to. I went inside.
I have a math test. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from Power School. You are marked tardy. I went inside. This seemingly small acts of prevention symbolized a great struggle in the lack of connection our education system has with environmental awareness. This story is not an isolated event. It is a systematic problem with the national education system.
As students who are working towards our future, it can sometimes feel like we have to choose between two paths: disobedience and protecting our future, or following the traditional path set out for us, and waiting until we are qualified to make real change.
School is so all-consuming that it distracts youth from civic participation. This should be a crucial part of our learning. It has been said before, and I will say it again. Why should I be studying for a future that may soon be no more, when no one is doing anything to save that future?
The system in place puts needless roadblocks in our way. It tells our youth activists that upholding unreasonable restrictions matters more than our future.
Many adults have acknowledged the climate change crisis. With remorse, they say to me, what? They ask us to save what their generation has not done. We are recognized as those who will in fact determine the future, because we will, yet we are prohibited from doing so. Education should not be the problem. It should be the solution.
Let's give our students a voice in our school by empowering student government and leadership.
Let's learn about today's issues as opposed to solely history.
Let's incorporate the biggest crisis facing humanity into our curriculum.
And lastly, let's create a school that can make environmental awareness a school-sponsored event. Thank you.
Thank you, Amelia and Maya. My name is Rio. I started working on climate activism with optimism regarding our town's progressiveness. I had just won the first round of votes for an amendment that I was working on called the Youth Vote, which it allows 16 and 17-year-olds in Brattleboro to vote on local issues and serve on local government. And I felt very good about that first initial victory that we had. And I was excited to move forward into more political realms in this town. From the Youth Vote, I started working on a different initiative in my organization called Brattleboro Common Sense, called the Common Sense Conservation or Climate Crisis Initiative. It went to a vote at the representative town meeting here in Brattleboro at the end of March. And I was excited. I had a feeling, I just knew inside of me that it would pass. But it failed. And part of this was because of the late time that it was voted on. It was voted the last article of a 13-hour day in which many people were sitting around and making boring decisions on tax raises or budget cuts. And people were really tired. It was 9:30 p.m. And they were given this last final article, and they didn't want to debate on it. There was a 5-minute flimsy debate on such an important issue, and then it was just voted down with a vast majority. And I thought that Brattleboro was ready to make the sacrifices that are necessary in order to fight against climate change. But after that vote, I realized that I don't think anyone is quite ready. In the time since that vote, I've come to the conclusion also that we don't have more time to make nice legislation and go through long processes in order to pass climate change resolutions. We need immediate action to fight against climate change. And I've come to the conclusion that the way to do this is through civil disobedience. I found this partly because of Extinction Rebellion, which is a group that was started in the UK, which it focuses around disruption and civil disobedience as a basis to make real climate change.
Clean your room!
Okay. Multiple huge movements have been fronted by civil disobedience, such as the civil rights movement in America, the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, and many other labor, anti-war, and social movements worldwide. Civil disobedience evokes a major emotional reaction in spectators in a different way than lawful legislation does. It is serious and it's scary, but it is necessary in order to sufficiently work to mitigate climate change, which is also serious and very scary. I participated in an act of civil disobedience for the first time recently. I blocked traffic on Main Street in Brattleboro while holding a huge banner at the faces of those who were stopped. It said, "Declare climate emergency." And I felt a sense of empowerment that I'd never felt before. I have been to many marches and rallies, but this was the first time that I felt like I had gotten a real serious reaction from people, good or bad. Many times prior, I have finished a nice, mild action of walking down the street and chanting nice words and holding up a nice sign that says, "Oh, we have hope." And I was surrounded by people who were immediately satisfied with what they had accomplished. But what had they accomplished? Maybe a nod from a stranger or applause from a few passers-by. These fellow activists would go home after a rally and pat themselves on the back, and so would I. But I now know that this constant, repeated action of preaching to the choir is not enough. This habit of small, non-intrusive actions is pushed upon us, youth in particular, and encourages us to stay in our comfort zone and never take up bigger action. Adults around us tell us that we are doing everything possible when we march down the street once every few months. But these small permitted actions, such as groups getting permits to occupy a space for a few hours, or kids getting hall passes to strike from school, these aren't radical actions. And they will not cause serious and radical change. They might help open someone's mind, but they won't cause serious and radical change. And we need radical action to produce radical change. And radical change is absolutely necessary in order to save us from complete climate catastrophe. Thank you.
As a kid, I never thought I had to be the one to worry about climate change. I assumed that the adults in my life would be able to fix it, and I ignored everything I saw in the news. All of it was denial. I didn't think that we could actually destroy our planet like this. But in the summer of 2011, you could no longer see the stars in the sky in Cincinnati, Ohio. I didn't realize it until years later, but we had produced so much light pollution that I didn't get to see the galaxy anymore. Now that I've grown up a little bit more, I've taken more of a realistic yet hopeful approach to the matter. I live with doing what I can, and I try to pour all my support into the people who can make the biggest possible difference. I try not to think about the sense of impending doom, because prophecies are self-fulfilling, but I try to think about how we can overcome this together, this climate crisis, and how we can rally behind ourselves as a community. I live in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I went to public school there until 8th grade. I didn't feel encouraged to participate in activism until I came to New England, and I entered a culture that celebrated it. I was lucky and I was privileged enough that I could make it into the Putney School with enough scholarship. And I started exploring everything I could. I began doing work in activism during my sophomore year of high school. I was already involved with activist groups, including my campus's LGBT club, feminism club, and diversity committee. But I decided I wanted to focus on sustainability, a largely underrepresented and less publicly acknowledged group. I wanted to learn how these different systems of oppression intersected. And for me, it seemed like there was a lot of low-hanging fruit to greatly improve sustainable practices. I began attending trustee meetings at my school on divestment and ESG investment, and divestment is a form of activism. I attended the NOFA conference in UVM, and I went to several workshops on sustainable farming practices, specifically low-till. I designed the website for the Putney School Climate Justice Conference, and in the spring of 2018, I was elected to my school's Board of Trustees for the 2018-2019 fiscal term, and I was also accepted as a sustainability coordinator for my school. I'm lucky enough to be in a school where student leadership is greatly encouraged, and I had access to these opportunities. In the spring of 2018, our Sustainability Committee organized a climate justice conference. It featured keynote speaker Majora Carter, who does a lot of sustainable work in the Bronx, and workshops hosted by a myriad of people all over the New England area. It brought us all together under the common goal of learning about climate justice and the action we could take. While it was a lot of while it was a big success, we poured a lot of energy into that conference last year, and we didn't give ourselves a lot of space to improve. So this year, I decided to sort of steer my committee into the direction of improving inward before improving outward, as to avoid looking like a bunch of hypocrites. I didn't only want to improve as a sustainability coordinator, but as a community of people, because not everyone has access to these opportunities to learn about climate justice and sustainability. So we did a lot of work inwardly. I'll just list them because we have a large enough group on campus that we were able to accomplish a lot. We restarted pre-consumer compost on our campus, and we created a 3-bin system so that we could start composting within the dorms, which was a big issue. We restarted a program called the Green Guard program, where at least one person from the dorm would collect compost and record electricity readings from our electricity meters on campus, so we could be more aware and sustain our knowledge of how we use energy. Last but not least, this year, in April of 2019, our Board of Trustees voted to add a fundamental belief centered around sustainability to our school. This occurred after many school forums and after me and my adult sustainability coordinator, Don Zweig, fought with the Board of Trustees in order to make sure that it stayed within the mind of the school going forward and that we could model it for other schools. These aren't the only things we accomplished. I'm very proud of a lot of our younger members for having a lot of initiative in soft plastic recycling, but we elected new sustainability coordinators, including our youngest one, a sophomore, one junior, and two seniors, including myself. Moving forward, one of my biggest goals personally is taking our activism off campus. While I love going to boarding school and wouldn't change it for the world, it's really difficult to incentivize people to go off campus, like incentivize adults to take us off campus. Even all of the work I've mentioned only mostly affects my community and doesn't have as much of an impact on the outside world. We want to be the pioneers for these things, but we can't do that if we don't start dialogue. I want to increase interaction with organizations like the Root Social Justice Center, specifically trying to get our students out there for the Youth for Change and Soul Food Sunday programs. And I want to interact more with organizations like Migrant Justice, the Sunrise Movement, and the Rich Earth Institute. We have incorporated some programming from the Rich Earth Institute into our freshman curriculum about urine farming, which is gross but also really cool. And I want us to open our minds and interact with people outside of our own experiences and get off the hill. Another goal of mine is to increase the knowledge around intersectionality and how inequity is increasing all over the world. I want to start a bigger conversation about environmental racism and how lower class people of color are the most affected by climate change, despite the fact that the biggest issues stem from the abuse of multi-billion-dollar companies. For example, Monsanto, Nestle, and Amazon. When large companies try to hold us accountable for their mistakes, we need to keep in mind that this is a passive and ineffective form of activism. It is capitalism in a trench coat. They need to keep themselves accountable for pumping millions and millions of pounds of garbage into the ocean and into our bodies before trying to shame us for using goddamn plastic straws. While personal accountability is equally important, we need to collaborate and rally behind tackling larger issues before we demonize someone because they don't have reusable straws or compost systems or even recycling. It's usually a question about education, denial, and accessibility, which I don't think is addressed enough in this conversation. Finally, I think activism needs to be free-formed so it is more constructive, it has more positive reinforcement, and there's more incentivization for joining in. I think it's very important that we need to fight for the issues that we believe in, but I don't want to start a mob mentality, and I think civil disobedience is very important. I think some of my biggest frustrations is being dismissed by adults, even though adults should be the ones taking initiative sometimes, and accessibility activism. And I need help with all of those things, and I need the youth in my life to be taken more seriously by adults, and I need the adults in my life to understand that we are going to be the people that change the future. Thank you.
That was really amazing. I've known about climate change for about as long as I can remember. When I was a kid, I wanted to be an inventor. I wanted to invent the best electric car or find the free, clean energy source. As I grew up, I figured it was other people's responsibility to solve climate change. I thought it was up to the scientists and the politicians to figure it out. I have to admit that in large part, I put the climate crisis out of my mind. In fact, I became an auto mechanic, fixing gasoline-burning cars. Recently, I decided to take my personal carbon footprint more seriously. I thought that the solution was for every person to look at their own life and make more sustainable choices, like riding bikes or taking public transportation instead of driving cars, and buying local, organic, and regenerative products, not eating meat. I have been trying to practice these things in my own life. Because public transportation is rather lacking in New Hampshire, I have found myself biking a lot. The other day I was slogging up a hill on my way to work as cars zoomed by and smelling the exhaust in the air and looking at the trash on the ground, and I thought to myself, I'm not really solving climate change. As much as I wanted to believe that the people driving by me in their cars were reassessing their personal transportation choices, they were not. In fact, many a time as I ride my bicycle along the pothole-filled roads of Massachusetts, Vermont, and New Hampshire, I contemplate the uncertain future. I examine the two most likely scenarios as I see them. The first is that we don't do anything, or rather we continue doing what we're doing. We continue to put profit above all else, including our own happiness. We continue to consume at an insatiable rate and allow corporations to control our world. As I see it, this will lead to the eventual demise of the human race. Perhaps the ultra-wealthy will survive in their doomsday bunkers, but very few of us will be ultra-wealthy. The second scenario is that we change, with a combination of new technology, political breakthroughs, and economic tools, such as cap and trade and carbon tax. We are able to keep the warming below a 2-degree increase, and those in the global north are largely okay. We make minor adjustments, but our way of life is pretty much preserved. Those in the global south do not fare so well, but we are willing to overlook that, as we overlook the global south now. Now, tell me, which do you prefer? Scenario 1 or Scenario 2? They're both pretty bad. Maybe Scenario 2 is a little better, but I don't want to save humankind if we are going to continue to oppress one another. In both scenarios, we continue to practice capitalism. I do not believe that we can live sustainably under a system that promotes needless consumption, a system in which you are expected to buy something one day and throw it away the next. Perhaps there are good ways to practice capitalism, but the way we are practicing it now is certainly not good. Corporations rule our world and serve as a funnel, pulling the wealth from those at the bottom and giving it to those at the top. But we are manipulated into supporting these corporations. We are forced to buy their products, and they stamp out our small businesses. Through a broken campaign finance system, these corporations control our government. They own our news, our transportation, our employment, our water, and our food. This gives them immense power over us. At this point in my bike ride, I stop. I sit on the side of the road and feel pretty hopeless. Maybe I pick up some trash and listen to the birds sing. And then I start to dream. I dream of a third scenario in which humanity is unified against a common goal and a common enemy of climate change. We come together and redesign the core structure of our societies to be not only sustainable, but fair and equal too. Imagine walking down the street and hearing only the sounds of birds chirping and people talking, smelling only the sweet scent of flowers and healthy soil. What if we could work less and have ownership over the businesses for which we work? What if we didn't have to live with the guilt of knowing that our lifestyles directly contribute to the oppression of others? What if we could live in a vibrant community in which homelessness, drug abuse, and suicide were non-existent? Communities in which we are connected to one another and working towards a common goal. Now, this is kind of a crazy dream, but maybe it's possible to get there. It's going to involve reassessing everything about our society, figuring out what is most important to us, and working towards a world in which we can all get what we need. In essence, I'm talking about a revolution here. Now, I know that some of you are probably squirming in your seats. You're thinking, revolutions are dangerous, and they are. But this revolution can be different. It's unique in a major way. Climate crisis is the alien attack. It is the one thing that has the possibility to unite all of us. We are all affected by it. Now, the climate crisis could further the divides in our society and drive people to be more selfish and greedy. But we must fight against that. We must start with the basics and strive to be present in the world, to become better listeners. Then we build a network of worker-owned cooperatives that can compete with the corporations. We use our power as consumers to boycott the corporations that have permeated every part of our lives. In this way, we control the money, and therefore, we can begin to take back control of our government. At the same time, we need to strengthen local government. We need to exercise our power at the city, county, and state level to stand up to corporations that wish to degrade our environment. We must continue to protest, but protest alone will not get us there. We must build the society we wish to see. All throughout this process, we have to lift our neighbors out of poverty. We must include everyone. This revolution must address the needs of those who are oppressed. Our society must be made wholly inclusive. I no longer believe that we can invent our way out of this crisis. I don't believe that climate change is the responsibility of the scientists and politicians. I don't believe that we can solve this problem through every person doing their individual part. I believe that our power exists when we come together. There are strong forces trying to divide us. Capitalism thrives when we are isolated from each other, afraid of each other. What I'm trying to tell you is this: we cannot buy our way to a utopia. We cannot just eat the latest superfood. In order to build the world that we want to see, we have to do the hard and rewarding work of being awake in the world and present with those around us. Thank you.
Once I knew that burning gasoline and other fossil fuels releases carbon dioxide and that this is threatening the health of the planet, I wanted to invent a car engine that ran on carbon dioxide and pulled it out of the atmosphere. I remember thinking, why do we even use gasoline? There must be something better. A few years later, I learned more about chemistry and came to understand why certain chemicals can be burned as fuel and that it's not chemically possible to burn carbon dioxide. I also know that new technologies alone will not fix our world, though they may be one tool out of many. However, the dream of reversing climate change has stayed with me, and that's one of the reasons why I want to talk about the Drawdown Project. I recently went to a very inspiring talk about drawdown in Westminster West given by Laurel Green. And listening to this talk reframed climate change for me in a different light. Instead of making me feel despondent about the situation, this perspective was hopeful and inspiring. The Drawdown Project is a compilation of research on 100 possible solutions to climate change, with the benefits of each estimated in gigatons of carbon dioxide pulled out of the atmosphere. I won't go into all of them, but a few of the categories are empowering and educating women and girls, using land in a way that creates abundant, healthy food and natural spaces, and transportation that's more efficient, less isolating, and accessible for all income levels. These are all things that we want to do, climate crisis or not. These solutions create a spiral of positive benefits for everyone. And that's why I find this research so inspiring. There's something here for everyone's skill set and passions. We are in crisis, and we do need to work hard, but we can work hard doing what we're good at and what we love. And I brought a copy of the Drawdown book for you to see. Another source of inspiration for me is an idea from the book Braiding Sweetgrass, which I read a couple of years ago. This book was written by an indigenous scientist and plant expert, Robin Wall Kimmerer. In it, she expresses the idea that humans can have a beneficial place in the natural world, that we can have a reciprocal relationship with the world around us. I would much rather live in a world where we receive from and give back to nature, and are therefore part of it, rather than a world where the best we can do is to do no harm. I want to live in a world where human beings are a gift rather than a burden. I know this is possible, and we have a lot of work to do. As Paul Hawken, the editor of Drawdown, says, is climate change game over or game on? Thank you.